Okay, so I believe we are live now. Yep, we are live. Okay, probably technically we should wait for people to join in, but let me just share it across on our WhatsApp group and probably see if there's anybody joining in. Oh, there's two people already here. Great. Hello, everyone. We'll be just starting in just a second. Let me just share it across. Okay, let's just go on right ahead. So, good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for tuning in if you guys are. And welcome to our wonder session with Mr. Fazli Azeem here. Let me just do a quick introduction of Mr. Fazli Azeem, and then I'll start off with my questions and our overall conversation. So, Fazli Azeem is an assistant professor of design at the Media Science Department at the Shaheed Zulfikar Ali Bhutto Institute of Science and Technology, and he currently in the Karachi campus, where he teaches undergrad and master students of media sciences, media studies, advertising, strategy, and design. He is also the program manager of the Zabis Masters in Media Sciences and Masters in Advertising graduate degrees, and member of the Zabis Doctoral Committee as well. He graduated with an MFA in design from the Dynamic Media Institute of the Massachusetts College of Arts and Design, Mass Art, Boston, USA, in 2014 through the US State Department's Fulbright Scholarship. And that he is that among many other things. So we're super excited to have him. And obviously, for me, it's an absolute honor to be having a conversation with you. So, Fazli, I just want to start things off by I've already given a brief introduction, but I really want you to give a discussion on like what people don't know you about, or like some things that I've probably missed out on. So please, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, so as far as my work goes, and I am an educator, but I started my career in the field of design, rather graphic design, and then into other areas of design. But after becoming an educator, primarily at the undergrad level at universities, I think I was able to do some support for the autism advocacy movement in South Asia and obviously in Pakistan. When in 2006, I became the first self-advocate for the autism spectrum in Pakistan. I started giving my interviews on TV channels, through websites, on Autism Awareness Day after 2008 when it started at the UN. 2nd April every year is Autism Awareness Day, and a lot of my contributions have been again professionally in the area of design and academia, but in the non-profit area more towards advocacy in training special educators, in helping pediatricians and doctors in spreading awareness of the autism spectrum, as well as being a self-advocate. A sort of a couple of things I've done internationally with other self-advocates, including co-author a book on the subject of autism and Asperger syndrome, and also participated at the UN event in New York on Autism Awareness Day in 2013 at the United Nations, as well as other participation in conferences in South Asian countries such as India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and in the US and in other places around the world. So again, my work in advocacy kind of intersect because what I teach is in a way related to what I talk about, and that is basically the role of media and the role of media in social change, rather, where social advocacy and inclusion is that change that we are targeting and aiming for.
Fantastic. I mean, that those are just so many things, and I just like to re-emphasize that it's absolutely an honor for you to come with us. And as you understand, with what we do at WonderTree, WonderTree is a platform which provides movement-based games, interactive-based games for any level of education that you require, whether it be early childhood or special needs. And we a lot of our clientele is based on individuals within the autism spectrum or the Asperger spectrum. So yeah, super insightful to have you here, Mr. Fazli. So just to get things started, get this conversation started, I just encourage you to probably give a general definition of what the autism spectrum is. Like, how would you explain autism to a general audience? So, yeah.
Okay, so I'll try not to use a lot of technical words because again, we are not doctors. I'm not a special educator, and I'm sure most people watching are probably not medical professionals or researchers, right? They're probably parents. These are people from the general public, people who might have relatives on the spectrum, or might be educators, or might even be the siblings of other people on the spectrum, right? So, from a general perspective, I'll summarize it in a very short form. Uh, because for me, autism basically is a lifelong condition. It's not a disease, it's a disorder. And it's just a different way of looking at the world. So, what happens when the child is born? The brain becomes slightly larger, a word which is called microcephaly, in which the larger brain and has obviously larger subcomponents, right? One of those components is the amygdala, which is a part of the brain that is responsible for the fight or flight response, the control of adrenaline in the blood, basically what makes you react to the world around you, right? So sometimes children or people on the spectrum, they are affected by something called sensory overload. When they are seeing something, when they're hearing something, when they're feeling something touch their skin, perhaps, or things where they might get overloaded by too much information, loud sounds, painful sounds, certain smells, their senses basically become overwhelming. And the reason is that their amygdala is slightly larger, it's reacting to the environment, and this causes sensory overload, which results in problems in communication. It results in problems in concentrating. It basically becomes a communication disorder. And that obviously, so the first thing we try to target is we try to reduce the sensory overload for people on the spectrum. That's step one. The second thing that happens is as a consequence of a larger amygdala, people on the spectrum have excellent memory usually, and what happens is their memory is highly visual. So they have a difficulty when they are looking in people's eyes, or particularly strangers, when they are talking or communicating. So it's not that simple or easy for them to maintain eye contact like regular neurotypical people do, right? So that's the second thing, and sometimes that makes people think that they're hiding something or they're not trying to communicate, or so that does happen quite a lot. And the consequence and result of that is because they're not making eye contact a lot. As a consequence, they'll miss out on the social cues. They miss out on the process of socialization, like how to start a conversation, how to continue, how to interact with people, how to play in a social environment with other children, not with just themselves, but with other people. So the whole social interaction concept kind of goes a bit harder because they really haven't done the eye contact level for too long. So this is something that needs to be taught over time for these people on the spectrum to kind of get used to it and desensitize their self, and then they can learn obviously in a step by step, right? That's so again, lack of eye contact causes this. The third thing that usually happens in most cases of people on the spectrum is that they don't have passions, they have obsessions. So when they really get into a particular subject, they will read everything about that subject to the extent of reading books, encyclopedias, research manuals, website, every possible thing they can get hands on. So it's very common. And as a consequence, they sometimes do like to spend more time with books, with computers, and rather on their own as opposed to the social environment. So they're spending so much time in these areas, in these subjects, that they tend to master these subjects and eventually start teaching them, or start talking to people about those areas of their specific interest or obsession, right? So it becomes again a communication disorder. Another thing that happens, how to identify children on the spectrum or adults on the spectrum is some of them may have certain ways of interacting with the environment. Sometimes they get nervous, so they're doing the rocking chair, rocking the chair back and forward, or kicking the pen, or fidgeting their leg perhaps, or perhaps even flapping their hands like that. And the reason why this happens is because of anxiety. Sometimes the environment is, it's random. You can't predict. There's no system to the environment. As a consequence, this might cause high levels of anxiety for a person on the spectrum. There's a mechanism in the body by which, when we're basically, cracking our knuckles, right? So what basically happens is there's a chemical reaction that happens in our blood by which the synovial fluid, which contains carbon dioxide, basically gets released, and it kind of a vacuum forms. And as a consequence, for just a microsecond, the body gets a signal that the level of carbon dioxide in the blood is reduced. That releases dopamine, which is a chemical that kind of calms the body down. So basically, the body of a person on the spectrum is trying to physiologically trying to calm themselves down from the anxiety that's happening because of the larger amygdala, right? So these are again physiological symptoms that most people are not aware of. There's a lot of research been done in this area, but educators generally in Pakistan are not taught these things in the textbook that they read, right? The MBBS textbook about the sort of behavior disorder of autism or how to recognize it. Educators are not aware of this. So these are a few things. Obviously, there's a whole list of them. No two people on the spectrum are exactly the same. They all
Yeah.
have variations or different kinds of requirements or special abilities or special, things that they need help with, support.
Yeah.
So these are some of the common things, let's say,
They
among other
definitely.
things.
Yes, yes. So I understand it's a very vast topic, but thank you for being as thorough and as understandable as you possibly could. I really appreciate that. So I think a good flow of this conversation would really be that we probably take an example. Um, in this case, yours, and then we could probably see how these different elements that you've mentioned that individuals with autism have challenges with, how they can, or how can the people around them can support them in addressing these, or not addressing, maybe like working with these matters. So just to start off, my next follow-up question would be that you mentioned a lot of elements, like social clues. There's a fidgeting element. There's an element of too much noise that you guys sense, so that individuals with autism sense, I'm sorry. And I really want you to share your example that obviously over the course of your professional career, you've probably had to face these adversities. So how did you cope with them? And if you could probably share those in the light of probably say sharing some advice with any one of our audience who probably might be suffering the same thing.
Mhm. Right. Okay, so I'll give examples. So one of the most common ones is the problem of, if somebody takes a photograph and there's like a flash, and that flash is obviously very bright. It's painful to the eyes. And also sometimes going out in the sun where the sun is very bright. Again, very bright light, and sometimes the yellow light kind of becomes, kind of it's hard to read in that area. So the white light would generally be preferred in a reading or learning environment as opposed to yellow light historically. Also, so as far as the light goes, as far as the reading goes, some children with autism might have dyslexia, which might cause a problem in the reading of letters. The letters might be flipping upside down or reversing. Not all of them, but some might, right? So in that case, there are special kind of lenses that people wear. So these Ray-Ban UV ultraviolet yellow lenses, they actually helps our children kind of read better on the paper. It kind of increases the contrast between the black and white text and the white paper, right? So it kind of helps in that process. As far as the sensory overload regarding the sound or too much loud sound, too much, so something like music might be distracting, or there's some environmental sounds like cars going on in the background, and it becomes a distracting form. In that case, you have these special sound blocking earphones that people can wear that kind of helps them lower down the environmental sound and that kind of controls it a bit because there's no, off sound for the environmental, how do you turn off the sound of the cars in the background, right? I mean, you can. How do you turn the sound off from your neighbor's music sort of system, right? You can't do that. But if you wear those sound blocking headphones with no music, obviously, just to lower down the environmental sound, that does help, right? There are other situations where, for example, people on the spectrum might feel that their skin is sensitive to perhaps tight clothes or perhaps to dust or to sand or to other textures. So in that case, a lot of people actually use hair removing cream or other devices to remove the hair on their body. Not the hair at the top, but other hair, particularly the hair near the ear. That can actually be removed using hair removing cream, and that kind of helps you lower down the intensity of environmental sound disturbances. Some people on the spectrum, because it's a spectrum, right? So there's a lower end, there's a higher end, it's a complete variation. So there's the words like hyper or hypo that are used, right? So in this case, I would take example that if somebody is hyper sensitive to sound, that means the sound is too much for them. So they need to reduce it. There is also a possibility that somebody might be hyposensitive to sound, meaning lesser sensitive. So that means that perhaps they're not hearing you correctly. So in that way, you may need to contact them by touching their shoulder and then telling them, okay, I'm talking to you, right? Or perhaps visually showing something in a drawing form or a written form as opposed to verbal communication, right? Because they might be hyposensitive to the audible sensory environment. In the same way, there are people who might like to basically, so there's a word called proprioception, and proprioception is a word that basically means pressure, right? Pressure on the skin. So a lot of people in the spectrum sometimes wear clothes that are a bit tight, or they wear something heavy or like a blanket or something that puts pressure on their body and that kind of calms them down. One example is Dr. Temple Grandin. He's an American self-advocate who has been widely documented of creating a machine, a squeeze machine that kind of helps her calm her down, right, in a particular case. But there are also people who don't, on the other side of the spectrum, who may not like being touched, who may not like being hugged. So obviously they keep their distance and they kind of stay a bit further from people. Also, there are people who have issues regarding a particular smell of a particular kind of food. Some children don't like the smell of fruits because it's an acidic smell. Some children don't like the smell of bread. Some children don't like the smell of milk or other, because it's a variable thing, right? There's no one rule fits all for everyone. So in that case, we generally kind of give them like scented, tissues and maybe rose petal or something that they can keep, like, so that it kind of blocks out the sound, or maybe tell them to use perfume so that maybe it blocks out the other environmental smells because they are hypersensitive, as I said, to smell, or in this case, in some children, they might be hyposensitive. That's also a possibility. There are a lot of people on the spectrum who basically sometimes have trouble in understanding the form of communication, right? So how to start a conversation, how to end a conversation, how, what is emotion, like, what does happy mean? What does sad mean? So basically, because of the lack of eye contact I mentioned before, they might need to be explicitly taught these things. Social cues, they might need to be taught step by step how to communicate, how to start a conversation, how to share certain things with people. Like if they like to play with a certain thing like Lego, how do they share that with others, right? What's the right way? And perhaps not, ramble on with a particular topic, because again, they might be really passionate about a certain subject, not as passionate as perhaps other people might be about that subject. So they keep going on, right? They won't know when to end and then move on to some other topic. So again, these are very common factors. And in some cases, children might even have, again, lack of fear. So they might not understand things like, fear of animals or fear of traffic or fear of heights, or otherwise it might be the opposite. As I say, it's a spectrum disorder. So they might be very sensitive to people or animals or other things around them, and they might actually be afraid of them, right? So again, because of the spectrum, there's a wide spectrum. There are children who can communicate, who are able to vocalize speech. There are also children and adults who cannot, right? But it's not like because they cannot talk, they cannot communicate. They can. Sometimes even better than other people, but they communicate using sign language or typing on the computer or writing or text-to-speech software, right? So augmented communication. So again, because the spectrum is so wide, there are some common features that happens, and obviously the brain undergoes a process called neuroplasticity. That means that once you engage the brain, the children undergo therapies, their brain adapts, it learns, it changes, right? So the diagnosis so-called is not a static diagnosis. A child with autism might, for example, be converted to an Asperger diagnosis later on, right? Based on the ability to communicate and their personal growth. So these are again some features that I would explain. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
How about now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So apparently this microphone's not working. Let me just take this off. Okay, so I just wanted to share some examples that you mentioned as well, along one of which is the tags behind your shirts.
Yeah,
Some individuals with autisms have a very big issue with those tags. And I can actually relate with those things sometimes as well. If there is an uncomfortable set of clothing, you are uncomfortable, right? So, and it just depends on how sensitive you are to those things. And another element to social cues is that, as you mentioned, since they're not making eye contact, they can't understand expressions, they're not looking at those expressions. So it's just a good practice to maybe encourage them to ask them to look at you when they're talking and stuff like that. That
or
helps.
look at themselves in the mirror.
Yes, that's also a very, very, very good practice. And it sometimes takes a little time to for them to understand it, because in my case, what I've experienced with interacting with individuals with autism is that you basically tell them to behave a certain way once, but then they ask you why, or they're
They
curious
might
about the
not
reasoning.
understand. They might not understand the logic behind it.
Exactly.
There has
So
to be
it's
a logical reason.
yeah, exactly. So just with everybody, you have to explain things once or twice, or give a good reasoning about it, and they'd understand it. So it's just an element of that. So fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of those insights. I think just a few other questions that I have. What are some guidelines that you'd want to give parents who have children or children with autism? What advice would you give them, or like what sort of guidelines do you think they should go through um, in handling
Right.
an
So
individual like
yeah.
that?
So our country, Pakistan, it's a different culture, right, compared to other countries like the West. So what happens is that a lot of the books and the interviews that you will see of other people on the autism spectrum are going to be people living in the US or people living in England or more developed countries. And there are a lot of self advocates over there. They give a lot of interviews. You can easily see those interviews on social media or YouTube. But the problem is that the advice that they give sometimes is not South Asian advice, right? Because their society is different. They have a greater sense of inclusion. They have certain. Like, I'll give a small example. They have a certain day in the week in which every large supermarket franchise has a certain hour that is only for parents with children on the autism spectrum, or perhaps a cinema would have a movie show specifically for families with children on the autism spectrum with the level volume of music and so on, specifically for them, right? So societal understanding is a lot in other countries. This understanding has not reached the level that we want in Pakistan or India or South Asian countries. It's going to take some time and awareness. The media is working on it. It's very slow, but we're getting there slowly, right? So the real problem that I would feel is the same thing in academia. Most of the books that you've read your entire life, where did these books come from? They came by American authors, by British authors, people in the West, people who are not like us, who've never seen us, who don't know how we live. It's a very different model of living, this communal sort of family system, living together in a very different kind of society. It's not the same as living abroad. It's completely because abroad, the ultimate situation for a person in the Western countries would be to live alone and be independent. I mean, that's the ultimate form of independence for a person, so-called with any kind of disability, right? To have independent living, to be independent of support, perhaps with the helper, but not require other support like his siblings or parents with them, right? I mean, that's their ultimate goal, right? But the ultimate goal here in, like, say, in a South Asian country like Pakistan is not that. It's how to get a job, or it's either to have living, communal living, right? Living with relatives, living with family, being a contributing member of the family. That is sort of our goal. That's a very different goal, because over there they have social services, right? If you're not working, you get paid by the government. There is no social service system here at all. So it's a very different model. So the problem is that a lot of the books that exist by people abroad, or rather self-advocates abroad, there is a desire or requirement for you to read the material that is coming from self-advocates in South Asia. So, for example, I've written a lot of interviews. You can just search my name on the internet or Google. You'll find these interviews. And I talk about South Asian issues. I talk about issues in Pakistan or people in this region. There are a lot of self-advocates who perhaps are not very public, they're very private, but they have given or articles, they have given interviews in their own media in Bangladesh and India and other countries. But there's again very few of them. I would obviously want more to come forward and share their stories too, just like I have. But the point is that these stories of at least parents. Now, parents in South Asia are writing articles. They are being interviewed. They are coming online. They're very active, right? That's a good thing. I see a lot of Pakistani parents, giving interviews on Autism Awareness Day. I see a lot of parents from India, Bangladesh, Dhaka, other countries also giving interviews, sharing their views and so on. These views are very important for us to listen to, because the
Definitely.
same problems that they've gone through, we are going through the same time right now.
Yeah.
India's sort of media and Bangladesh's economy and their sort of issues are what Pakistan was facing maybe 5 to 10 years ago. They've gone
Mm.
much further ahead, but we can
Mm.
learn from them. And because
Yeah.
of whatever political reasons or other nationalism reasons, we don't kind of look at that. I think that
Yeah.
sort of sets us back, because then we start looking at the West and their
Yeah.
model and their economy, their lifestyle is very
Hmm.
different from. I've lived in the US for 2 years, so I can
Okay.
verify there is nothing in common between a US economy and how they live life and what is
Yeah.
happening here. It's a very different model.
That makes sense. Firstly, I just wanted to cut in probably just to probably ask you regarding what sort of art, which article sources would you recommend for parents looking for material to search for. I understand you mentioned looking for your googling your
Yeah.
name, Qazi Fazli Azeem. You guys, everybody on tuning in should definitely see whatever Fazli's talked about in other platforms as well. But I'd encourage you to also share the Indian or Bangladeshi sources that you're mentioning as well. If you could share some
Yeah.
examples,
So
some
on
names.
on Facebook, like for example, there is a group called Special Needs Pakistan, right?
Hmm.
And there's also a group called Team Neurodiversity. Now
Hmm.
these are two of the best groups made by Pakistani parents with special
Okay,
needs children. And
that's awesome.
so yeah, so again, Special Needs Pakistan and Team Neurodiversity, both
Okay.
very excellent groups of thousands of members from all across the country on Facebook. I would highly recommend all parents should join them and learn from other parents like them, Pakistani parents in Pakistan, who are
Hmm.
also going through the same process and learning and self-learning that they have
Yeah.
gone through, right? As far as the other South Asian countries, just go to YouTube and search for any country space autism. Just put that word. Example, Bangladesh space autism, India space autism, Bhutan space autism. You'll find videos of parents, sharing their resources and sharing what
That's
they've
awesome.
learned. And good examples of that, right? So I would suggest that. The third thing I would say is, you see, there's a lot of parents out there who have, in a way, shared a lot of their materials, but these materials are, I think, most of them are not in the form of books.
Okay.
They're mostly in the form of lectures and other things. And that's kind of gets diluted because there's just so much content out there which is being
Yeah.
generated by the West, right? But so basically, sort of Western sort of content kind of overshadows our locally developed content because there's not a lot of locally developed content. But still,
Makes
there
sense.
are videos out there. People do, give lectures, interviews because of COVID. A lot of things
Hmm.
happen on Zoom. A lot of people have uploaded that content on YouTube. Just search for example, Pakistan Space Autism, and you'll find a lot of excellent content being shared completely free. Videos, lectures by special educators, by some of the best trained, autism therapy professionals in the world who are working
Hmm.
in Pakistan, in
Hmm.
ABA therapy and other kind of therapy. So a lot of this content is completely free. Just
This
search for
is
it on social media, search for it on Facebook. Search for it on YouTube, Autism Space Pakistan. You'll find this content. But
Yeah.
look at it. I'm just saying, look at this content.
Yeah, definitely. That's thank you for sharing all of those. I think a good initiative that we can do within our capacity at WonderTree is probably, for whoever is watching, we could probably do something regarding creating a group of parents or people who are just interested in learning about autism. We can create a group for you guys, and we can probably collect that content, and share it across in that community as well. If people are up for it, they could probably message us over inbox, and if we get a lot of responses, we can actually take an initiative
So
on
they'll
this.
inbox you at the WonderTree Facebook page.
Yeah. Phase over on
Okay.
WonderTree will obviously be, be in close coordinations with you regarding what material to share, yours or other people's as well, because obviously this is something that is extremely necessary, and we'll try our best to put it out there. That I am a little curious. Maybe our session over on the on live is paused. Let me just give me just one small second to double check. Um, okay, no, we were going on. Okay, fantastic. So, Fazli, I think let me just go through my questions one more time and see what we might have not covered. Um, Yeah, so I understand you've already covered the question that I'm about to ask you right now, but just to summarize, so what would individuals know or be wary of when interacting with individuals with autism? Just if you could just share maybe like quick, quick and easy, nice and concise, 4 or 5, 6 or 7 points that you think people in the general, well, in the general public should be wary of when they're interacting with anybody for that matter. It also is good with it. It's a good point to interact to be wary of when you're interacting with an individual with autism. If that question makes sense, could you repeat? Do you want me to repeat it? I think I was a
No,
little
no. I
confused.
think one challenge that people face is like if a person has some kind of paraplegia, right? That means if they are physically disabled, if they're on a wheelchair, it's kind of
Mhm.
obvious that a person has a special need, right? Or they are in some form incapacitated, and you kind of have to help them out, do their thing, help them with what
Definitely.
they're trying to do. But in the case of autism, you see, physically it's not a disorder. In most cases, children with autism are physically, I mean, they're okay,
Yeah.
as in they look okay, right? But maybe on the inside something else is going on. So it's a neurological communication based disorder. It's a behavior disorder, really.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, their behaviors might be a bit odd, as in they might be doing things which are different, or other people in their environment are not doing, right? For
Yeah.
the sensory overload reason, as I told you, right?
Yeah.
They might be
Yeah.
overloaded with some, which other people just would find strange, because that sound or that light or other kind of stimulation might
It's
not
just
be
normal for them.
causing. It's just normal for other regular neurotypical people. Yeah. So that surprise, because some people might think, okay, that's bad parenting, which is incorrect. Some people might think, that child is just a rude child or just misbehaving. That's also a bad thing. So because it's a misunderstanding. People don't
Yeah.
understand the reason about autism. That's why these misconceptions exist. Also
Mhm.
because a lot of people with autism historically, their parents kind of keep them home, right? They don't bring them into the social environment. So people in the social environment are not used to seeing children with autism. They're not used to seeing those behaviors out in public, right? That's why they get scared or worried, or they just don't know what's happening, right? As in,
Makes
because as
sense.
I said, culturally, in the Western countries, if you're different, that uniqueness is your strength.
Yeah.
Society will celebrate your individuality. That doesn't happen in a South Asian or developing country. If you're
1 second.
different, you're doing something bad. You have to
Yeah.
like do the same thing that everyone's doing. Drink the
Yeah.
same tea, watch the same match, perform in the same sports, right? I mean, these pressures of society, it's because of our culture. That's how
Yeah.
it is. Everyone
Yeah.
tries to mimic or be the same way. So autism actually then stands out very much so in such a situation, especially in our developing countries, in South Asian countries. And as a consequence, the awareness of it in the media, it's not to the level that we would ideally be. Because if you look at the neighboring countries, they have movies on the subject, they've got dramas, they've got, comic books, all kinds of things are addressing the awareness of autism, what autism means, right? And that
Hmm.
people on the spectrum can become contributing members of society, and they have many
Yeah.
gifts that they can give to society and be contributing members of their families, and be inclusive and everything. But because of the lack of awareness, that causes all kinds of challenges in traditional environments such as Pakistan. So that's one challenge. I would say the other thing I would probably point out is that, look, from a government point of view, our government really has not done enough. I mean,
Hmm.
yes, there is a center in Karachi which apparently provides some basic therapies, but beyond that, I believe our laws need to change. The definition of autism needs to be accepted as a disability. There
Okay.
is no word of autism. The word that is used in our legal law, which is a British law, is mental retardation. And autism is not mental retardation.
It's not.
That
No.
means that, the brain is not, it's not a disabled, sort of permanently disabled brain. That's not what autism. It's not a disease. It's a different way of being. So it's a very different perspective from, let's say, currently as being followed in developed countries, right? The whole
Yeah.
neurodiversity argument. So our law really need to change also, and laws will change when
Definitely.
parents come together. Unless you don't come together and advocate and demand this change by writing articles in newspapers, no change will happen.
Yeah. No. So thank you for pointing all of those points out. It's a community effort, and I believe the way our culture is, a lot of things actually come across when a large set of people come together for it. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we in our capacity of WonderTree with our pool of audiences, we could probably start something off along the lines of that. If people are interested in being a part of it, they should definitely drop in us a message, and we will definitely see what needs to be done. So yeah, so I think we took up quite a good amount of time, and we've covered a lot of things. So thank you so much, Fazli, for doing so. I just a conclusory question to you. What advice would you give anybody who is watching this video, probably live right now or afterwards when we upload it on other platform? What short advice would you give them right at this moment? Something short and sweet.
Yeah, I think one thing that, sort of a message generally, is that, when you see a person, you see a person behaving in a certain way, you see a person, with their challenges. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
everyone has challenges, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
there are different levels of those challenges. Some have it less, some have it more. But
definitely.
never underestimate the ability of the person to become better, as of, when they are given the opportunity to
Well
become better.
said. Well
So,
said.
and
I
that
mean, yeah.
opportunity is what is known as inclusion.
Yeah.
Inclusion must happen in our schools, at our universities, across the country, in every place, wherever it is possible. People of all kinds, of all
Hmm.
special needs, of all ages, of all types, everyone must be accommodated. Accommodations must be provided not only by us, by our organizations, but also by
Hmm.
our government. And
Okay.
sometimes there is a demand to demand these.
Okay, so just thank you for sharing that. That was actually very well said. I just wanted to reiterate my question if on the context of what advice would you give anybody who is an individual with autism out there trying to set a mark in the world just like you have, mashallah. So I just wanted you to share some advice to them if you have any.
Well, I think the first step is understanding your diagnosis, understanding what your limitations and possibilities and opportunities are. And the best way to do that, I would say, is to get a mentor.
Hmm.
If one is out there, perhaps, try to look up other self-advocates across the world. That's why I actually learned from. I learned from reading their books. I learned from seeing their videos. And I learned a lot about myself by reading about them. So I would say learn more about others, because their journey is very similar to your journey. It's not that different, the journey that we go through. So learn from others and grow so much that one day you can help others like yourself.
Okay, fantastic. Very well said. So let me just go through I just gone through the questions that have come up in the chat. Waqas Bhai has asked a very
Mhm.
interesting question that I meant to ask you a little sooner because we did touch upon this conversation. So you mentioned that some autistic children are not social. What is a good way to make them more social, or like what is a good way to make socialization a little more accessible for them. So could you share some insights
Okay,
on those?
so let me give an example, right? Your CEO, Mr. Waqas, loves pizza, right? And
Yeah.
I see a lot of guys with Jahara, eating pizza and so on. And so what I would suggest is now suppose the person on the spectrum likes a particular food like pizza, you obviously can, share that in a social environment. So that's one way, right? But usually from traditional point of view, every child, every person on the spectrum has a particular set of interests, right? Obsessions that I mentioned before. Suppose
Yeah.
like they like playing Lego or they like drawing or comic books or toys or something.
Dinosaurs.
What yeah, especially dinosaurs. Yes. So what happens is that if they are able to share that with another child, their age, whether that child is on the spectrum or not, that's a way in. Just make them, put them in the same room, put them in the same environment, give them a few toys or a few books, and just watch what happens. That's all going to be automatic.
Yeah, fantastic. That's a wonderful answer. I'm really glad Waqas bhai asked this. So that pretty much wraps up our conversation. Thank you so much,
And
Mr.
I'd like
Fazli, for
to
taking
add
the time.
that
Yeah, yeah,
WonderTree makes some excellent augmented reality games
yeah, yeah,
regarding physical movement, which apparently is a very good thing for people with special needs. My own research, I was doing my master's in the US, was also in this area. One of my projects was with the Connect, which literally you could use control the mouse with the sensor and move around. So I understand exactly what
yeah,
Waqas did, and was one of the early advisors to the startup. So
yeah.
but my point here is that WonderTree's products are also an excellent way for children with social problems to actually play a game together, to come and become social through the process of playing a game with other children. So I would
Yeah.
highly recommend that, and I recommend other people to come and use WonderTree services so that they can help their children become more social in a playing and entertainment-based environment.
Thank you so much. That is an absolute honor that we got an endorsement from you. I just want to put it out there one more time, that Wonder Games now, Alhamdulillah, has progressed so much further that we don't require any complex connect systems. It works directly through your simple webcam out of your
Webcam.
laptop. Yeah, so we use RGB technology for that. So if anybody is looking to use Wonder Games, it's free to download. Just go to www.wondertree.co and you can download our games right now. You just have to create a profile and you can start
So
your free
this
trial.
works on a PC and a Mac laptop, right?
So it works. Currently, we are in the process of setting it up on Mac, but it's only available on Windows at the moment because Pakistani or in Pakistan में तो खाली सिर्फ Windows PCs ही होते हैं. But yes,
So
we are
Windows
trying to
10,
glow.
Windows
Yeah, no.
10.
So yeah, it is. There is a certain list of specifications. They are all on the website. You just have to go www.wondertree.co. All the requirements are available. You just and it's a very straight mainstream laptop specifications. और उसके ऊपर आपकी games बहुत आराम से चल जाएंगे. So we highly encourage you, if you are looking to engage your child with autism in movement based learning or just interactive based learning. We have a bunch of games that encourage multiplayer based learning as well, so that's a good opportunity to socialize. And we have games that address motor functions for other individuals with special needs as well, such as Down syndrome, ADHD, and stuff like that. So that's just a small call to action that I just wanted to place for you guys. Thank you so much, Mr. Fazli, for taking the time out. And stay tuned, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Allah. And this is where we end the session. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.